This week on Quality Digest Live, we explore the dangers of verbal sleight of hand.
That's right. Plus, valuable lessons about the Gamba from Harish Yos by way of Russian writer Anton Chekhov. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for January 4th, 2019. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Publisher Mike Richmond. Happy New Year to all of you.
There you
Dirk,
go.
Happy New Year to you, man.
Happy New Year, buddy.
Hope you have a great 2019.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be fun. It's starting off cold, chilly
Yes.
here in Northern California.
It's about 30 degrees in the studio here.
Maybe not as chilly as it is where you are, but kind of chilly here. Well, we're going to start the show off this week and this year with our Rip from the Headlines segment. This is where we kind of semi-regularly talk about what's going on in the news and maybe how it applies to the world of business in general and quality in particular. So a couple of interesting stories, and they're interrelated in my mind. I want to kind of run through them with you and kind of give you my take on what it means. The first big news, obviously, is the government shutdown here in the U.S. And, you know, it's been going on since before the holidays, and it's now leaking into the new year, and now there's a new Congress, there's a new House of Representatives controlled by the Democrats.
Right.
And this could be a long-term deal, right? It could drag on for quite some time as the prognostications now. So that's a big story. Another one that came up, and I'm going to kind of talk about how they're related, is this idea, the guidance that came out from Apple, looking back on their fourth quarter, and they unexpectedly had like a $5 or $8 billion shortfall.
Oops.
That's a pretty significant, several percentage points. I think it was from like 93 to 85 or 98 to 90. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like a shortfall of several percentage points, like 5 or 8 percentage points. Big drop.
Yeah.
And their statement on that was, Tim Cook's statement on that was that it was due to the Chinese market, primarily. It was due to the Chinese market, where there's just been a huge slowdown, and they are assigning the blame to the tariffs, to the trade war that's been ongoing.
Although China's economy's been slowing.
It's been slowing anyway,
in general,
but their feeling is that this is exacerbating that.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the fact that they want you to pay $1,000, upwards of $1,000 for a new generation of a phone.
It's nothing to do with it.
Because people are popping their batteries out, and they're just bringing a battery into a new battery in their old phone and upgrading that way. I mean, why not, right? I mean, it's a lot cheaper than spending $1,000 for these new generations of phones. So there's a couple of problems with Apple, and there's a couple of problems with China, but certainly this idea that the tariffs, the trade war that's been going on between the U.S. and China is contributing to that. And I mean, my question about this is, can't we all just get along? I mean, you think about these two stories, and really what it means is, it's gridlock. It's people that say, listen, we're going to fight for what we think is right rather than conciliate and be a compromiser. I do a lot of work in politics, and I've gotten to know a lot of politicians, fortunately or unfortunately, in the last couple of years. And I talked to them a lot about this idea when they're running for office in the last election cycle and before that about, well, what's your belief system? I mean, you go into office, are you a conciliator or are you a fighter? And everybody says the same thing, I'm both. Well, you can't really be both. I mean, we have a new Congress, as I say right now, where a lot of the Democrats that came in, the freshman Democrats, are basically have said right out, we're gonna gridlock this. We're not gonna agree with what needs to be done to keep government moving, but that's not the job. The job in government is to make deals and get things done. So, and I see it working in business as well, where you see that, where people have belief systems and they don't want to compromise. So, I think there's a lot of danger and a lot of damage that comes from not compromising. What's your take on how all these things sound interrelated?
Yeah, I mean, you got to keep moving, whether it's government or business or whatever. Yeah. Compromise is part of it. I think there's less tendency to want to compromise in government just because there's not, well, except for recently, there's no dollar signs necessarily attached with business. If you don't compromise, something seriously bad is going to happen to your company, more than likely.
Yeah.
So I think you have to. I mean, you have to work out, and unfortunately, if Apple is right, and a lot of what's going on is because of the trade wars and so forth, as opposed to just a natural slowing of China's economy and stuff going on internally with Apple or Apple products. If it is in large part due to the trade wars, then it's kind of, in a sense, out of Apple's hands. And now you have kind of a bigger issue, is how much should that influence what lawmakers do? Should they be looking at what's good for the United States, or should they be looking at how bad are we impacting a large company like Apple or Caterpillar or GM, who also have interests in China as well?
Well, these companies are American companies, but they're really international companies.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the benefits accrue to the country in which the companies are headquartered, of course. But they're international companies, and they work across country lines, and that's important to remember too. I think about this even more broadly in the perspective of, compromise within like a team. If you're working on a team, politicians, like you say, you understand that because they have voters. Their voters vote for them for reasons that say, well, my base wants me to do this. I understand that. But you're in a business and you're in a small team. We have small teams here in Quality Digest where you say, well, I really believe this, and I really believe that what I know and what I think about how we should go is right. Somebody else has an equally strong belief that that's wrong and you should go the other direction. Well, somehow you've got to meet. You've got to be able to say, well, okay, yes, but is there a way that we can both get at least something that we want out of this? And the problem isn't that doesn't exist, because that almost always exists. The problem is is there a willingness on both parties to want to try to find it.
That is an awesome segue to the next story. You could not have set me up better. You did not plan this, but actually you could not have set me up better for this next segment. And so we'll come back. We'll come back to this because this whole, when you're discussing, when you're talking about things and trying to get your point across, or trying to get a law passed or laws not passed, or trying to work out a business deal, it all does come down to conversation and how those conversations take place, and some of the verbal sleight of hand that happens during those conversations. There is an author that we feature every now and then. His name is Robert Wilson. He is I don't know, I guess you'd call him motivational speaker. That's kind of his job. He comes in and speaks, and kind of a motivational kind of guy. His writing is very personable, not always a match for our audience, so you don't see him all the time, but every now and then he hits the nail on the head when it comes to dealing with personal, or in this case, interpersonal issues that I think impact the workplace. His latest article was Protect Yourself from Verbal Sleight of Hand. And in this article, he discusses the various ways that people try to win an argument with verbal sleight of hand rather than arguments based on merit, based on facts. They kind of try to twist words and kind of win an argument by, kind of like verbal skullduggery, right? It's a word that doesn't get used enough. Skullduggery. Skullduggery.
Love it.
That and the word vamp. Skullduggery and vamp. You just got to use those two words.
A vampy skulldugger. Skulldigger.
I think this particular column is really relevant now, at least for us here in the media, because we see so much of these little tricks and fallacies working their way, certainly into comments, if you read a lot of comments under articles, but also actually these same tricks going into op-eds, which we would expect, but also even straight up news coverage. And I think because of all this, I believe we've also been seeing worming its way more and more into our workplace dealings as well. So I want to take a look at a few of these verbal tricks, or fallacies as they are called. If you were part of the debate team, you learned all about argumentative fallacies. Now I'll skip over the one of the most obvious one, the ad hominem, or personal attacks, name calling. We see those all the time, and very often, particularly in the workplace. Ad hominem attacks come out of frustration. I mean, you're trying to hash out something. You're trying to get your design idea across, your customer service idea across, and you're getting frustrated, and you call the other person an idiot, or you call their ideas an idiot. And we all do that. We understand that.
Sure, but it's sometimes more complex than that. It's also kind of like, well, you're this, so your idea is that. Like, you're a
right.
man, so you can't know what that
is, right,
Well, what is
right.
that? The ad hominem attack is underneath.
Right.
Kind of trashing your idea many times too.
And we all
Subtly
kind of recognize those. So I don't want to talk about that one too much. But there's a couple other ones. There's what's called the ad populum or the bandwagon. Everybody is doing it, so we should do it, right? Or you should agree with me because look, everybody else is saying the same thing, right? And kind of to me, this kind of brings to mind of this is the word benchmarking. Remember the whole benchmarking craze?
Oh yeah.
If all of our competitors or cohorts are doing it, then we should do it too. And we appeal to that. I know I've done it. I mean, a lot of times we look at some changes we want to make. It's like, well, look, this magazine's doing it, and Forbes is doing that.
Look at that website.
Look at that website.
Yeah, right. Yep.
So we should do that. And I'm certainly guilty of that. But that's not really a way that you should be arguing. Another fallacy is cherry picking, or is sometimes called card stacking. This is where the proponent of an idea will omit key information in order to slant a position in his or her favor. So you're making an argument at work, for some sort of idea, and you only highlight the promising parts of that idea, and you downplay any negatives or any negative repercussions that could happen if you carried this idea forward. The false dilemma, this is where an option comes down to two choices, right? Well, we got to do this, or there's only this choice or that choice, and obviously this one is bad, so we got to go there, and ignoring well, maybe there's some other choices, So when I think about all of these, and we could go on and on, there's straw man arguments and red herrings, and there's a million different types of fallacies. But when I think about all these, there's something I think in common about all of them. And that is that, number one, they don't necessarily involve outright lying. They're just more like lying by omission, maybe.
Right.
And they aren't necessarily employed on purpose. And I think what happens is we get in the midst of an argument, and we get so caught up in trying to get our own point across that we don't want to listen to the other person, and we don't even fully investigate our own stance, right? And so I think it's important when you're going to discuss, whether it's a customer service issue or a product design issue or a new idea, some sort of innovation, that as the presenter, it's part of my duty to make sure that I present all the facts, good and bad, and it's also the listener's, your job to listen if I'm leaving anything out. It's your job to kind of pick up on these fallacies, cherry picking or false dilemma or whatever, to understand that, wait a minute, maybe I trust this guy, I trust Dirk, I trust what he's saying, he's a friend, he's got good ideas most of the time, but maybe he's not giving me the whole story on purpose or not on purpose. But you've got to be aware of these problems and be willing to dig deeper when you're making these discussions.
Well, I'll tell you my perspective on this is I often, maybe to my detriment, I don't often think about the bias of the person who's presenting information to me.
Okay.
I consider my own biases in accepting the information that's being given to me. I assume that what I'm hearing is truth.
Okay.
Is just it's.
I tend to do the same
because
thing.
I can't know. I can't really know. So the first thing I do is I say, okay, what's my response to what I'm hearing? What are my own biases maybe that are preventing me from seeing the validity or pushing back on this in some way? And then maybe I will start to say, all right, well, in addition to that, is there a bias coming at me that I'm not aware of that I need to be thinking about as well? But I think about myself first.
Okay. Well,
my own filter.
I think that's good, and that actually I think that opens up kind of a couple key things I think everybody has to remember, is that everybody is right sometimes.
Yes.
And the corollary is everybody is wrong sometimes. Yeah. So that means me, that means you, and so just because a person you admire or trust or whatever presents an idea, no matter how pretty it sounds, they could be wrong. No matter how much you trust them, they could be wrong.
Well, it's more complicated than that, even. Because I think what's actually happening is everything that somebody says is both a mix of right and wrong.
It's both right
at the
and
same
wrong.
time.
Exactly, right.
And there's some percentage of it, and some people may be like 99.9% wrong, but I mean, there's something in there, almost always, there's something in there that's some truth, that's something that's reality that you can lock onto. So, I mean, it's valuable to look at it that way. I mean, because, again, if you examine your own bias and you say, well, I don't believe that because I have this feeling, and if you think that's valid, you can then look at what the person is saying, even if you don't think that that person is right or is withholding information or outright lying, and try to lock onto something that feels truthful and say, well, let me look at this one piece of what you said.
Right.
And let's talk about that part of it. And if you can reach agreement there, again, compromise. If you can reach agreement there, you may be able to begin to broach.
So, and bringing this back to your rip from the head, that's really what this comes down to, is in order to reach a compromise, both sides have to be looking for the truth in both their positions and look for, obviously, compromises, where do they overlap? If neither side is presenting all the truth, or if you aren't discerning the truth, if you aren't digging for the truth, if you aren't willing to see past these fallacies and dig in order to extract what the real truth is from both sides, then you're never going to find where those overlaps are in order to find a position from which you can compromise, from. You know, and I think, I mean, obviously we see this in government, but that's kind of a whole other thing. But we see it in business as well.
Sure. I mean, in business, you know, you say, hey, we've got a budget for $2 million to invest in a new solution. We've got this problem going on in our plant, or whatever it may be.
Right.
And you have a team together to decide how you're going to allocate that money to try to solve the problem. And there's going to be a lot of range of options that come from that team if you do your job properly. So you need to begin to focus on what you can agree on, where that Venn diagram overlaps, and you can say, okay, here's the areas where we really think most of us agree, and then you look at that, I think, and you go from there.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be that complicated, but what happens is emotion gets involved.
And that's the problem. Emotion gets involved.
That's the problem. But if you can separate that out, you're generally in a good way to at least start to solve the problems. Good stuff there, Dirk. Yeah, Robert. I like Robert Wilson's stuff. He's a really good writer.
I mean, he's a real touchy-feely kind of guy.
And
like,
it doesn't always fit,
but no, he's got some good ideas.
He does. He really does. All right. Well, some other good ideas, and another really good writer that we like. Now, we're going to talk about here in a minute. But first, I want to say that there's two things that I really like, and that's great writing and interesting perspectives on quality and the world of quality and how you can improve. And to my great good fortune, this article that we're going to talk about really presented both of those things, and it was one of the first ones we presented here in 2019. The title of the piece is Chekhov's Gun at the Gemba. And it was written by Harish Jose, and he is a lean practitioner. He's a lot of things, but lean is really his bailiwick, and that's where he works, and it appeared in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest's newsletter. So in the article, he takes a classic piece of wisdom, and it's a quote that appeared in several different variances over Anton Chekhov's career. Of course, he was a great Russian playwright. He was a short story writer. And this quote that I'm going to mention is one that appeared, like I say, in very different forms over the course of his life and his career. It comes down to the advice that a writer shouldn't show a gun in the first act, or the first chapter, as the case may be, of a work if he or she isn't planning on that gun going off at some point later in the story.
Right.
Now, many people think that Chekhov's gun is about foreshadowing. They'll say, well, that means that you're foreshadowing something's going to.
Right.
Sure, it's a little bit about that, but really what it's more about is about utility and efficiency. It's about making sure that whatever you're going to use, whatever you're intending to use for a purpose, has a purpose, and that it has a place, or else why is it there in the first place, right? If it's not intended to have a use, why are you even putting it out there? I mean, anything that anyone puts on stage really should have a meaning and a purpose to the audience, communicate something. It's really no different on the shop floor. Everything that's there that you're going to work with has a purpose, has a meaning for the people that are in that space, the people that are working in that space. And that's a really important thing to consider. So how does Jose translate this to the lean workplace and lean workflows? Well, he offers some interesting physical and visual examples of this. The first one he says is there's value in having a definite fixed place for all your tools and materials. I mean, talk about things like shadow boards. And
right.
There's a real value for that, where everyone knows where things go and they can see right away how a process works and how you do it. That's really important. The other thing is that these tools and materials should be close in hand and easily accessible to the operator. That's just really good lean process right there. I mean, if you're going to be doing a workflow, make sure everything is right there where you can use it without having to bend or stoop or walk or whatever. That's all muda. These should also permit the best sequence of motion. again, this is just really straight out of the TPS, the lean,
Right,
lean
right.
playbook. I mean, you don't want to waste motion. That's Muda as well. So, you know, if you're having something here that's earlier in the process while you're using your left hand, well, put it here, and then put the thing later in the process there,
Right,
as opposed to
right.
the other way around.
Yeah.
You just don't want to do this and that. You want to just kind of flow
right.
normally around it. Another one is that 2 or more jobs can and should be worked on at the same time. Well, if you can.
If you can,
If
right.
you can, just be as efficient as you can in doing your process. 2 or more operations should be carried out simultaneously as well on the job if you can. And then finally, just overall motion should be minimized. And a lot of these insights really encapsulate, again, some of the collected wisdom of Lean and TPS as it's evolved over the course of time. And it really goes back before that, before Toyota, to the days of Henry Ford and Frederick Winslow Taylor, the whole thing
Sure.
about time and motion studies and efficient work. I mean, a lot of that stuff's been disproven over the course of time, but there was some good theory behind
Right.
that. The idea that you want to really study what you're doing and understand the various pieces of a process to improve it. And you know, I, as I often do, think about this idea, Chekhov's gun, and how Joe's kind of framed it in a little more philosophical of a way. I mean, for example, I mean, if you consider a process-based Muda, right, that everyone sees, and because everyone sees it, they have an understanding of it on a conceptual level, and they understand that waste eventually is going to go off. Right, like a gun goes off. Waste is going to go off in the form of lost opportunities and lost profits, and eventually probably lost customers. So ignoring it isn't an option, right? But we do ignore it. I mean, I think about, like, say, this gun and a process is the same thing. They're going to go off. If you put it out there and you put it on stage, if you put your Muda in your plant, it's going to be employed.
Eventually, yeah,
It's going to
yeah,
eventually
yeah.
go off. Now think about your customers, and whether you realize it or not, customers are akin to an audience at a theater, right? I mean, I thought about this when I was reading the article. I mean, they see everything that's happening, even though they're often powerless to change the action, right? Well, but they're really not powerless, because audiences at a bad play can get up and leave, and the play goes on, but they can make the choice not to suffer through it. Your customers can leave too. You know, they don't have to suffer through your bad process, and they will. I mean, they're going to leave if they experience those negative repercussions of a process that's loaded with Muda, right? I mean, they know that bad processes are going to eventually go off to their detriment, and they probably don't want to stick around to suffer the consequences of that. So, you know, it's interesting when you think about this. A customer is really just observing.
Huh.
You know, they really don't have a lot of power other than the power to leave.
Yeah.
And oftentimes customers that leave, we know this, don't say, I'm leaving. This is why I'm leaving.
Right.
They just don't give you any more orders.
Right.
You know, and especially online now, where you may have thousands of customers that you
Right.
don't really know that well, you just see them order or not. Well, if your process is not slicked out, if it's a lot of waste involved, yeah, that's what's
Yeah.
going to happen. Your customers are going to get up and leave just like an audience at a bad play.
That's interesting. I like that connection you make.
I mean,
That's
I think it's
pretty
true
funny.
though.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, don't you think that that's really
Yeah.
what happens? I mean, you often don't hear from a
Right.
dissatisfied customer. You know,
Right.
you hear a lot more from the satisfied customers than the dissatisfied ones generally.
You know, and I mean, just taking this analogy a little bit further, is also if your customer is your audience, and you have telegraphed or foreshadowed either something positive and you don't deliver,
Right.
or you have foreshadowed something negative,
Right.
either one of those is going to cause you to lose a customer. If you hint that something's coming, either advertently or inadvertently, and you don't deliver, you're going to lose a customer. If you advertently or inadvertently, usually inadvertently, hint that something bad is taking place, then again, you may have customers bail before they hear the shot go off, because they don't want to be there when it happens.
Right, exactly.
Right, exactly. Particularly if it's interaction, if it's transactional. You know,
Exactly.
banks, you know, healthcare. If it's a product, they may wait around to see whether something happens or not.
Yeah.
But if it's transactional, like this. Well, Apple's not a good example, but with a bank, let's say, if a bank has kind of foreshadowed or shown the gun that something negative may happen with that bank or that financial institution, they may have people bail just on the fear of seeing the gun.
And it could be fairly subtle, It could be an experience you have in the lobby, at dealing with a teller where the wait lines are really long. I mean, whatever.
Whatever.
You need to be looking at this stuff actively and driving out waste. I mean, it's just good advice all the time. But I mean, it's an interesting framework to put it in this perspective of this idea of this gun that's
Chekhov's gun.
there for a reason. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I've got a few minutes here. We deal a lot with technology. I mean, and I don't mean the technology that we cover, metrology equipment, that sort of stuff. Just as a business, we deal with technology all the time. We've got apps that allow us to communicate with each other. When we work at home, we all use Excel and Word and Google and all these things. So I'm wondering, when you look at your life, your work life or your home life or whatever, what technology, personally, do you feel helps you the most, and what technology you think has been more of a hindrance than help? But you're locked into it just because it's what everybody uses.
I would say on both ends, it's my smartphone. I mean,
damn phones.
I mean,
how do I work this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the most technologically cultivated person in the world.
No,
but, I mean, no, I'm not. As you will well know, Dirk, how do I do this? But I mean, we do have a lot of systems that, what I've noted, apart from the hardware of the smartphone, in terms of software, I mean, it's really become somewhat idiot-proof, a lot of this stuff, because I can do it. So that's why I know it's idiot-proof. But it's become so easy to do stuff. The templates that exist now for things like WordPress are really easy. I mean, they really make it very simple. You really only have to just kind of follow some prompts, and you can accomplish some basic stuff. You can't really do a deep dive in a lot of it. But increasingly, I think the talent of developers to do a much better job of understanding users. I think in other generations of technology, there wasn't as much of a real understing of how users.
It's what the engineer thought was going to be a good idea, and it's like the user.
What do you? Yeah, how do you?
What am I doing? Yeah.
But I think there's a much better understanding now of let's do it. I think it's a customer journey thing.
Yeah.
I think that we hear about it from we do it, and we hear from a lot of our customers too. They come up with a person. A person that they know, Technology Terry, or they're like, this person needs to get an understanding of how to use their smartphone.
Right.
All right, well, let's pretend we know nothing. Or let's get somebody in focus group that knows nothing.
Who knows nothing.
And start interviewing them. All right, take this phone and start using it.
Well, that's, who's the gal who we cover sometimes? She has the customer journey.
Annette France.
Annette France.
Yeah, she does that.
She does that, and that's always one of her suggestions. Is like, you've got to have a neophyte who takes your product or your software, or who knows nothing about it. If they can use it, great. If they can't use it, you got to pay attention to where is the stuff, where are they getting confused, and I think you talk about smartphones, but I talk about almost any app. We use Google Drive a lot.
Sure.
Is one of the big, I think, things that irritates the heck out of people, and Facebook is the same thing, is like every 6 months they decide to change an interface or how something works, and then so the next time you log on to Facebook, you're going, what?
Yeah.
What? Where is that menu was? Where? And it's almost unavoidable. And as people say, hey, it's free, so you deal with it. But I think that is one of the things that happens with technology. You have a technology, it's really good, and then of course, they want the developer wants to improve it, so they make changes, and they don't necessarily, that we know of, maybe they do, run focus groups to see how is that change going to impact others. Are people going to easily, even if it's a good change, are people easily going to track with it? Is it intuitive that you've moved this menu from here to here, or whatever?
We saw it not long ago with WebEx, where there were some changes in WebEx that we were like, oh my gosh, where is all this stuff now?
Yeah, well, that's a good example.
Yeah, I mean, but what I found is, and I don't know if this is just because of the way you adapt or whatever, it seems to me that once you do play with it, you're like, okay, yeah, that change actually does make a lot of sense.
Right. It is valuable.
Better.
Yeah.
This version is better almost always, but is it really better, or is it just that you got used to it again? Right. I don't know. I mean,
well, speaking of Taylor, sometimes we think something's better just because it's different.
Right.
Remember, that was one of the experiments that Taylor is
Yeah,
like,
we did.
well, we'll make the lights brighter. And all of a sudden, oh, wow, this is a lot better.
That's right.
Well, make them dimmer. Oh,
That's all about it.
it's just change.
that,
Right,
that,
right.
that refreshes the mind and gets you to look at something differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, technology is a weird one. I mean, like I say, I really feel like what I said first is true, and not just about cell phones, about smartphones. Everything, the technology is a burden and it's an opportunity. I mean, it's all that way. Because most of us aren't like you. You're really good at this stuff. Jeff Dewar is very good at this stuff. Chris Martin on our team is very good at this stuff. Chris Smith. I mean, a lot of you guys are really, really good at this stuff. Some of us aren't. I mean, I'm not that great at it, and it's like, it is a burden to have to work your way around and figure stuff out when you don't have an engineering mindset. And most people don't in the world have an engineering mindset. They look at something, they're like,
Right.
What?
Well, the real secret here is actually Ryan Day went, and I had to do this morning. If you can't figure something out, give it to your kid or your grandkid. He had to do that. Ryan was trying to figure, I couldn't figure it out either, how to do something on his smartphone.
Yeah.
So then he texts me back and says, oh, I gave it to my granddaughter. It's all solved now. It's like, yeah.
Well, I mean, not to go too far into this, but I mean, one of the frustrations I have with technology and apps in particular, because there's some fantastically robust apps out there that do incredible amounts of things. Like our CRM does a lot.
Yeah.
I know like 10%, 25%
Right.
of what it does. And I'm thinking I know there's a lot more here, the value that I can derive out of this, but I just don't want to invest the time.
Because you got work to do.
Because I got work to do. So I'm like, well, it does what I need to do. That's fine.
That's fine.
It's what I do. But I know there's more to it. I'm like, I can do more with this. It's designed to do these things, you know? So you try to figure it out. You call service, whatever you do. You call Dirk and you say, hey, Dirk, figure this out.
And Dirk calls tech support. And then I report back to you. Yeah,
right.
See, that's my trick.
But that's not uncommon either. That they're so robust which is good in a way because echelons of users can use it in different ways. So if you are an expert power user, you can get a lot of functionality. If you're a basic user that has basic functions, you can just use it at that level. So that's important too.
Yep.
Yeah, technology. Can't live with it. Can't
live with it.
Throw it away.
All right. Well, that is it for this week.
That's it for the first Quality Digest Live of the year. Thank you all for being there. We'll be back at you next week with another episode of QDL on January 11th. Of course, next week we're back at you with another big week of coverage here on Quality Digest. So
there we go.
Come back and join us. You guys all have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.
So long.